It is an early morning edition of the Recruiting Rundown. Welcome in, everybody. Kendall Smith and Wes Mitchell here. We're a little bit tired, but that is not stopping us from bringing you the recruiting news out of South Carolina football this week. Wes had a concert last night, and he still woke up at 8 o'clock to do this for us, which means, Wes, there's a lot of news to get to today, obviously.
Yeah, big week for South Carolina transfer portal happenings. We got more to talk about in terms of what is next, Kendall, and never a dull moment when it comes to recruiting, and especially with South Carolina.
Yeah, I feel like we say that every week. And right off the top, we should note that the transfer portal technically closes today. It's Friday, April 25th, as we record this. But Wes, that doesn't necessarily mean that South Carolina is done with the transfer portal. What it means is that players can put their names in the transfer portal up until today. However, once your name is in, a team can still recruit you past what is considered this portal deadline, correct?
Yeah, I feel like people get caught up in that a little bit sometimes. And so basically, all you have to do is enter by today. If you're a graduate, you technically don't even have to enter by today. You can enter at any point. And there's actually truly no deadline on when you have to pick that next school. It really is just depends on the academic calendar for that school you're going to. And obviously, we're nowhere close to what would be the fall semester starting. So yeah, not really any deadlines as far as that stuff goes. So as long as you're in there by today, which on the other hand, Kendall, means it is a big day for a lot of schools, including South Carolina, in terms of knowing is there any final players on your roster who may enter the portal. So that would be something to keep an eye on, not from the recruiting end of the portal, but from that kind of roster retention side of the portal, which is obviously very important too.
Well, today we are going to talk the recruiting side of the portal in South Carolina with a big pickup this week. George Wilson, an edge from Campbell, committing to South Carolina. He has an interesting story, Wes. Originally started at Florida State, but at one point was committed to South Carolina. So, what's his story? Walk us through kind of how cool this full circle moment is for Wilson.
Yeah, I thought it was funny. South Carolina, in their signee sort of post on Instagram and Twitter X, they even acknowledged that, which I thought was cool, just to kind of discuss the elephant in the room. And so with him, he committed way back summer of 2020, part of the class of 2021, was a highly recruited edge guy then, and he was expected to go to North Carolina. He picked the Gamecocks on his commitment day, and a little bit of a surprise. So this is a guy a lot of Gamecock fans who at least followed recruiting back then are familiar with. Well, that was obviously the end of the Muschamp era. So later that year, Muschamp, of course, got let go. And then he was one of those, if people remember, there's a lot of guys in this class who just sort of quickly decommitted. He was already being recruited by other schools because South Carolina was having a really down year. And so for him, he actually really didn't even look into the Beamer staff too much. It seemed like he already had some other schools he was highly considering. So commits and then signs with Florida State, didn't play much at Florida State, ends up at Campbell, where he's actually had a really strong 2 years, re-enters the portal. Now he will play his one final year of eligibility at the school that he originally committed to way back summer of 2020.
He gets to play for two schools that I think have some of the best mascots in all of college football. The Fighting Camels for Campbell, and then obviously the South Carolina Gamecocks. It doesn't get much better than that. But such a cool moment for him, and really neat to see how full circle that came. And we talk about the cool story, obviously, Wes, but we got to talk about the kind of player that Wilson is as well. What is South Carolina getting in him?
I think it's a sneaky good pickup for one, Kendall. Like, he had a really good 2 years there as a pass rusher. And I think that's what South Carolina wants, is they want a guy who can come in, have that pass rush juice off the edge. Obviously, we know they are trying to build depth at that edge spot. They're trying to build competition. That's something Shane Beamer has talked about. So when they go out into the portal, especially during the spring window, it's not always going to be, a top 10, just surefire starter type guy. It's going to be, can you find value? Can you find somebody that fits in with what they're looking at? But I've talked to several guys in the coaching community who are familiar with him, and they say basically as a pass rusher, he is excellent. He's really, really good. Not the biggest guy in the world. So in terms of some run stopping type stuff, maybe he's not as adept at that stuff. But if you put him in the right situation, so that could be basically pass rush situations, or the other side of this is we've seen Sterling Lucas do wonders with guys, even in 1 year, like Kyle Kennard last year. We've seen this strength staff do wonders in terms of putting some strength and weight on players in a short period of time. So I think South Carolina sees him as someone who already has that pass rush juice that you're looking for. And now the question will be, what can Sterling Lucas do in terms of development in a short period of time? But can they just add a little bit of weight? Can they add a little bit of strength once he gets in and goes through that summer program? But, this is a guy, again, even if just the baseline here is what you get out of him, you can put him out there in some third and long situations. And just having him opposite of Dylan Stewart at times, we'll see what the rotation ends up being. But having him opposite of Dylan Stewart as somebody who can win in those one-on-one pass rush situations, I think he's a good fit for South Carolina's defense, which is very aggressive about letting their guys sort of get upfield and go make plays, as opposed to being a little bit more of a read and react defense. So it is a good fit, I think, George Wilson in South Carolina, and they're very, very excited to have him coming into the program.
A strong pickup for the Gamecocks. And Shane Beamer talked about this a couple of weeks ago. He said, we're not just going to offer people and feel like we did something here in this transfer portal period. We're going to offer people because we think that they're a great fit for our program, and obviously to expand the competition within our program. So South Carolina looks to continue to stack the roster. George Wilson, I think, will be a solid part of that roster as we head into this 2025 season. So good pickup for the Gamecocks. And Wes, we alluded to it earlier, but the portal deadline is today to enter the transfer portal. That does not mean, though, that the work is done for South Carolina when it comes to recruiting some of these guys. So with the portal, what is next for the Gamecocks, Wes?
Yeah, so we spoke to Shane Beamer in Florence earlier this week at the Welcome Home Tour, and he identified two positions. It was kind of that edge spot, defensive end, which you see, obviously, they've gotten George Wilson, and they already had Damine Clowney signed as well for that spot. But the other position, I think the one you focus on now, if you're a fan, has got to be defensive tackle, kind of that interior D-line group. That's a spot where we saw them be very active during that first portal window. I expect, and really they already are, for them to be very active there again. Now, they do operate in silence a little bit. Like, you sometimes get the names, you sometimes don't. And so that's a little bit of the situation there. But I do think just in terms of the position group, that's the one they're focused on the most. However, we are seeing a little bit of movement from Carolina in terms of getting in on some offensive linemen as well, Kendall. That's the thing about the portal. You maybe have a plan going in, but depending on who is available and depending on what happens with your roster, maybe it starts to just morph just a little bit. And so I think the plan is maybe has changed slightly because South Carolina, as we know, has lost Ja'Kai Moore and Cam Pringle to the portal themselves. And those are two guys that maybe we're not going to be starters this year, but at least that does start to chip away at your depth. So I think if you look at some of the reporting from Thursday, I guess it would be, there's some offensive linemen that South Carolina has started to get involved with and may have on campus in the coming weeks. So I think that is something to watch for. And as always with the portal, even I've seen this pretty much every year now, it seems like, even when we say, hey, these are the positions they're focused on, it seems like there's almost always a guy that pops up that I would put in kind of that best available category where, hey, maybe we weren't even targeting that spot, but we just like this guy as a player. He makes us better. So I'll be curious to see, Kendall, is there someone else at a random position that just happens to pop up or not? But again, going back to that defensive tackle spot, I'd say that's still priority number one.
Well, as we receive updates, we will keep you all updated over on GamecockCentral.com. So be sure to check it out. Check us out on our social medias as well at Gamecock Central. It's still a busy time. Do not let that deadline fool you because it's not necessarily a deadline. So we'll keep you up to date with everything that you need to know. But Wes, it was an early morning edition of the Recruiting Rundown. I'm so glad we got it in because we promised everybody that we would do it here this week. So we woke up early to fulfill our promise and keep you all up to date on what's happening in the world of South Carolina football recruiting. It will only continue to get busier as we get a little bit closer to some of these official visits. We will start to talk a little bit more about those in the coming weeks. But Wes, I hope you have a great rest of your weekend. Everybody watching, I hope you have a great weekend. We appreciate all of you joining us here on Gamecock Central and the Recruiting Rundown. So for Wes Mitchell, I am Kendall Smith. This has been the Recruiting Rundown here on Gamecock Central, and we will see you soon. Bye, everybody.